Okay, anatomy and physiology students, in this video we're going to be talking a little bit about the respiratory system. In your reading guide, we went over all the pieces and parts of the respiratory system. We talked about the nose and the pharynx and the trachea and the larynx and the lungs and all the pieces of the lungs. And so in this video we're going to talk more about how does all of that work. So first we got to talk about how does respiration work, like how do we actually breathe. And the gas exchange, where the oxygen goes into the bloodstream and the CO2 leaves the bloodstream, all of that exchange happens in what we call the respiratory zone. The respiratory zone includes the bronchioles, the alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and the alveoli. Okay? Now, let's zoom in, and if you look at the walls of the alveoli, now remember the alveoli are the sacs. These are these sacs. They're made up of epithelial cells, just one layer of epithelial cells, and right next to all these sacs is a supply of blood. It's capillaries, okay? And so this is where the oxygen leaves the sac, the air sac, the alveoli, and it goes into the bloodstream right there to those capillaries, okay? And I like this picture. I put this picture in your notes. What you see is this alveoli. It's just one air sac, but you got to realize you got millions of these air sacs. The air from the air sac leaves the air sac and goes into the bloodstream, and then the CO2 that's in the bloodstream leaves the bloodstream and goes into the air sac so that you can breathe it out, right? So this exchange happens at the air sacs, the alveoli, and it happens through a process of simple diffusion. Now, if you guys can go back to Unit 2, we talked about simple diffusion is a type of transport that doesn't require any energy. This is where molecules just simply go through the membrane, simply go through epithelial tissue, okay? So each time we breathe, we have this exchange right there at the alveoli sacs. In this image, I'm just showing you a picture of what one alveoli sac looks like. You can see how it's made up of one layer of that simple squamous cells. Remember, simple means one layer. Squamous is squished, flat cells. And if you look in between these air sacs, you can see a blood supply. Those are those pulmonary capillaries, that blood supply that allows that exchange to occur. You can see these green things are cells that secrete mucus. You can even see some white blood cells. That's those little white blobs are, just to catch anything that's not supposed to be in there before it enters the bloodstream. Now, steps to respiration. How does this all work? First thing you gotta do, gotta breathe, right? It's called pulmonary ventilation. The word pulmonary means lung. You should know that, okay? Pulmonary ventilation is the fancy way of saying you take a breath in, right? So when you take a breath in, all the air fills up your lungs, okay? And the second step would be that there's what we call an external respiration, meaning that there's that exchange, the exchange I just talked about how the oxygen leaves the lungs and goes into the bloodstream. The CO2 from the bloodstream goes into the lungs. That exchange is called external respiration. Once the oxygen reaches the bloodstream, it goes somewhere. It transports. Step 3, respiratory gas transport. It transports to your arms, your legs, your kidneys, all the internal organs. Everything needs oxygen, right? And then first step, you have another exchange. This time it's internal. This time it's between the cells. All that oxygen that's traveling through the blood is now going to go into the cells. Maybe it's the cells of your kidneys or your toes or your muscles or your bones. It doesn't matter. But we call that cellular respiration because it's the same exchange where that oxygen is dropped off and the CO2 is picked up, but at the cellular level. So a little bit more about respiration. There's basically two parts. Inspiration, take a breath in. Expiration, breathing out. When you do this, inspiration, expiration, you change the volume of your lungs, right? When you take a breath in, it gets bigger. When you take a breath out, lungs get smaller. And the changes in volume changes the pressure, and that kind of allows the gases to move. So inspiration, things that you should know about inspiration. In order to take a breath in, you have to contract your diaphragm and your external intercostals. I would know that. I would know that inspiration requires the external intercostals, okay? And the diaphragm actually moves down. Take a deep breath in. Try it. Your diaphragm moves down, right? And your thoracic cavity increases, rib cages increases, and therefore the volume of your lungs increases. But check this out, when the volume of your lungs increase, the pressure actually decreases, right? There's more space, so there's less pressure. So the more gas molecules from the outside world come in. Now in expiration, the diaphragm relaxes, the external intercostals relax, okay? Now if you were to force the air out, you actually use the internal intercostals and your abdominal muscles. Now, do we force air out every time we breathe? No. But we can force air out, and so in those instances, you are going to contract a couple muscles, okay? When you breathe out, the thoracic cavity decreases, rib cage decreases, the volume decreases, and the pressure increases, okay? Lastly, a little bit more, there are some things that our respiratory system does that doesn't necessarily, the goal is not to take in oxygen. Like for instance, sneezing or coughing, or when you cry or laugh or hiccup or yawn. These are what we call non-respiratory air movements, meaning our lungs do these movements, but the goal is not to achieve that gas exchange. It's for another purpose. You know, in coughing and sneezing, it's to get some particles out of the airway. Crying, of course, we understand what crying and laughing and hiccuping, all of these are other movements that our airway does that's not purposeful in getting the oxygen.